Are we really going to keep believing that the history of the Americas began when Europeans arrived on the American continent? Were they the ones who first brought writing, the wheel, education, and, above all, medicine for both the body and the spirit to the Americas? Historical presence. The history of Latin America. Video Book 1. Before the year 1492. Preface. Current theory holds that history began with the invention of writing, which took place about 5,500 years ago in the ancient region known as Mesopotamia in Western Asia. Consequently, the currently accepted theory holds that anything that occurred before, that is part of prehistory, which ends with the so-called Age of Metals. According to these same commonly accepted theories, when Europeans who invented these theories arrived on the American continent in the late 15th century, they found that its inhabitants were still living in prehistoric times. They worked with some metals, but had no written language and did not know the wheel or God. But what kind of prehistoric people could have created what we're going to show you in the coming chapters of this video book? There are several theories that need to be debunked so that ordinary people can gain better access to and understanding of the history of Latin America. As is the case with the history of any culture, civilization, or state, we wanted to approach the history of Latin America by describing historical events from the very beginning. But as our research sought to pinpoint the beginning, it quickly became clear that things were different here. First and foremost, history must be defined by time. In other words, historical events must follow a specific chronological sequence. But here we are faced with a strange and unusual situation. For the time being, science is unable to make sense of many existing writings that have been lost to time. What we can and must do, however, is define the scope of this historical study, without dwelling on whether or not the term Latin America is appropriate. To that end, we believe it is appropriate to divide the American continent simply into two parts: Anglo-Saxon America and Latin America. It would be a good idea for the United States of America to change its name so as not to be confused with any other future United States that might emerge in Latin America. Latin America encompasses the geographical area that historically consisted of the territories that were once under Spanish, French, and Portuguese rule during the colonial era. In other words, it stretches from the southern part of the present-day United States of America to Tierra del Fuego and the Falkland Islands. We try not to fall into the classic habit of almost blindly repeating what previous historians have chosen to establish, as in the case of the German scholar Eduard Sailer, who more than a century ago coined the term Mesoamerica, which his student Paul Kirchhoff later popularized along with the terms Arido-America and Oasis America. We do not see the need to use these kinds of terms, even though they are widely used today. The prefix meso comes from Greek and means intermediate, but the territory where the peoples descended from the Olmecs, Mayans, and Mexicas developed is by no means intermediate. Nor will we use the traditional terms Columbian or pre-Columbian and Hispanic or pre-Hispanic in relation to the history of the Americas, because the logic applied to the analysis of archaeological data indicates that the European arrival and invasion of the American continent was not the only significant historical event, and a Eurocentric or Hispanic-centric approach is not particularly appropriate. These days, it is no longer appropriate to continue referring to the New World when talking about the Americas, because it was new only to Europeans in the 15th century when they arrived there. Likewise, it is not appropriate to use terms such as Paleo-Indian, Amerindian, or similar terms related to the distant subcontinent known as India. We have also deemed it appropriate to stop using the traditional chronological classifications, which have been in use since long before the invention of physico-chemical dating techniques, such as the Archaic, formative, and post-formative periods, as well as various early and late horizons, of which there are many different types, and all of which are entirely relative. These time frames and time horizons cause more complications than they are worth, because there is still not enough scientific certainty regarding human life and development in ancient times in this part of the planet. And new archaeological discoveries are constantly being made, forcing us to adjust their boundaries and scope. We believe it is also time to break away from the age-old historical perspective centered on migration. Why does everything always have to have a single origin? Why did the first Homo sapiens have to leave Africa, and only from there? Can't we see that even today there are indigenous peoples deep in the Amazon jungle who have never left their ancestral habitats? Why can't we researchers help but think that the first settlers of the Americas must have come from somewhere else, such as Siberia via the Bering Strait, or from small Polynesian islands? Today's books and online publications are saturated with a wide variety of content and theories that, rather than providing clarity, obscure and confuse human understanding of history. Now they are even trying to get computers to generate historical knowledge, even though they do not yet have sufficient capabilities to do so with the necessary reliability. On the other hand, however, traditional archaeology and historiography leave large epistemological gaps in the face of physical evidence for which they have no explanation, yet they try to forcefully maintain the same approaches and assumptions, even though these do not align with or correlate to what is plain for all to see. It is widely known that in various parts of Latin America, there are monumental megalithic archaeological remains that clearly point to the existence of a highly advanced, but also very ancient civilization. Megalithic structures, colossal heads, gigantic monoliths, pyramids, stone spheres, calendars, and inscriptions carved in stone, the decipherment of which raises more questions than it answers. There are many documented cultural artifacts, including ancient architecture, pottery, fossils, metalwork, goldsmithing, stone carvings, textiles, and many other important finds at countless sites throughout Latin America. The problem is the lack of integration among the analyses, because virtually all the technical documentation consists of specific, isolated studies generally conducted by foreign scientists or their assistants who live and work thousands of kilometers away from the archaeological sites in Latin America. It is not very easy to systematically organize in an integrated manner information on aggregates from popular sources, scientific articles, and their specific tables and conclusions. However, It is possible to do so with the help of appropriate information technologies that are available. But there are other problems that are more difficult to solve, such as the bias that can be found in many publications related to history and archaeology, which takes various forms stemming from the circumstances of human society, not only in Latin America. Nationalism and the political administration of modern states often cloud the historiographical perspective. When we study Machu Picchu, for example, we cannot refer to Peru because Peru has only existed since the 19th century, and the analysis takes place many centuries, perhaps even millennia earlier. Economic interests, especially those related to modern tourism, are another factor that we believe is hindering the proper development of archaeological and historiographical research in Latin America. There is no shortage of institutions that prioritize publicity and other efforts to promote their commercial activities. Sometimes bias is also determined by an academic school or school of thought, when there are members who advocate a predetermined theoretical position, regardless of the circumstances. As a result, many sources of information and knowledge contain a great deal of speculation, myths, and legends, which should under no circumstances be part of history. We advocate for giving science priority, so that a certain level of research rigor prevails, thereby ensuring that analyses and documents possess sufficient logical coherence. More than a few people are probably tempted to label us, or maybe they've already done so, because there's a tendency to think that you have to be on one of the well-known sides. Either you're with the black legend, or you're with the white legend, or you simply don't exist. Just as we said that we do not adopt a Eurocentric perspective, we also do not adopt a Quechua-centric, Aztec-centric, or Russian-centric perspective. In general, we reject both the centric and concentric perspectives. Our multidisciplinary team of Latin American and Russian scientists will present here the results of their research on megalithic sites and the cultures whose remains can be found in the Andean region of South America, as well as those discovered in the northern part of Latin America. The approach and method we use to process historical and archaeological information, which we briefly explain in the About section of our website, Historial.com, has even allowed us to establish a sufficiently sound foundation for a different theory of the history and prehistory of Latin America. Thank you for your attention. At Historial.com, you'll find information about conferences, discussions, and specialized courses, both online and in person, in various countries and languages.